Hey guys, tonight we are gliding back in time, not to the castles and battles you usually hear about, but to the quiet, creaky nights of the medieval world. Picture it, the heavy scent of wood smoke hanging in the rafters, the low flicker of a tallow candle, the muffled hush of a village winding itself into the long hours of dark. The moon is cold and far away. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, and then the sound is swallowed into silence. You're wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket, your head against a lumpy pillow of straw. And outside the shutters, the air is so cold, you swear it could crack like ice. Sleep will come, but only after a ritual one stranger than you might imagine. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive the drafty, smoky ordeal without a thick dose of medieval stubbornness. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as a traveler in this medieval night is that sleep is not the single solid stretch you know today. Forget about your neat 8-hour block, it simply didn't exist. Instead, there was a rhythm they called first sleep and second sleep. After the sun went down, most people headed to bed shockingly early, sometimes not long after sunset in winter. The house would go quiet, and you would drift into the first deep phase of the night. Then, a few hours later, you would wake naturally. No alarm, no rooster, just the slow, inevitable pulling away from dreams into the darkness of a cold, moonlit room. What would you do in this wakeful gap? Well, you might poke at the fire to keep the embers alive. You might murmur a prayer, or have a whispered conversation with your spouse, both of you huddled under covers against the chill. In more industrious households, you might mend a piece of clothing by candlelight, or check on animals in the barn. Some people even visited neighbors during this middle-of-the-night interval lantern, in hand padding quietly down lanes slick with frost. You see, this was an accepted, even expected part of the night, a built-in intermission for life itself. Monks took advantage of it too. Certain monasteries scheduled prayer offices in these hours, their chants lifting into rafters while the rest of the village drowsed and stirred in their own beds. But why not just sleep straight through? The answer is tangled in the realities of medieval light and dark. Without electric lighting, the human body naturally drifts toward segmented sleep patterns, an ancient tendency that electricity has simply overwritten. With the days so short in winter, people would sleep early, and the long darkness would be broken into manageable pieces. You didn't lie there fighting wakefulness. You simply rose for a time, did something quiet, and then returned to bed for your second sleep, slipping into dreams again, until dawn brushed gold against the shutters. In the snug upper rooms of timber-framed houses, the air was thick with the smell of the hearth far below. Beds weren't what you know many were, and nothing more than ropes, strung across a wooden frame topped with a tick stuffed with straw wool, or even reeds. The ropes sagged under your weight, and needed tightening from time to time, a nightly chore that gave rise to the phrase, "sleep tight." You'd lie there under layers of wool and linen, your breath clouding in the cold. If you were wealthy, perhaps you had a feather mattress, plump and warm, but most people made do with whatever was at hand. And the blankets, heavy yes, but they didn't fully solve the problem of freezing toes. So families often piled into the same bed, parents, children, perhaps even a servant or two sharing warmth in the most practical way possible. This wasn't just a mark of poverty. Even in prosperous households, bed sharing was ordinary. Privacy was rare and the dark was long. Then there was the matter of night clothes. You wouldn't find flannel pajamas here. More likely, you'd wear your linen shift, the same undergarment you used during the day, maybe with an extra wool tunic, if the frost was biting. Some people slept naked, believing it healthier, though this depended entirely on the season and the sturdiness of your blankets. And yes, lice and fleas were common companions, which is one reason washing your bedding was an ordeal often delayed until warmer months. If you can imagine yourself in this space, lantern light flickering on plastered walls, the creak of beams in the cold, you might start to feel the strange quiet that the medieval night carried. It was not the silence of our insulated rooms, but a living silence woven with tiny sounds, the soft drip of melting snow, a horse shifting in its stall, the faint scratching of a mouse in the thatch. Your first sleep was behind you. Your second sleep awaited. And you, a small, warm creature in the dark, were part of a rhythm as old as time. So when you hear someone say, people used to sleep differently, it's not an exaggeration. They lived in the deep sway of night and day, guided by firelight and moonlight, unbroken by glowing screens or electric clocks. And as we move further into this medieval world tonight, you'll see that sleep was as much a matter of survival superstition and shared human warmth as it was of rest. The night held its own rules, and to sleep well, you had to know them. By now, you've settled back under your rough wool blankets, your feet pressed against the calves of whoever is sharing the bed with you, partly for warmth, partly for comfort in the dark. But not everyone drifts off easily into their second sleep. The night in medieval times was a shifting landscape of sounds, smells, and sometimes dangers that could stir you from your drowsiness. You might hear the muffled clink of a pail from outside someone else moving about in the cold, or a sudden sharp cry of a fox from the hedgerows. The walls are thin, the shutters are loose, and the world seeps in whether you want it to or not. For wealthier families, bedchambers might be located upstairs, away from the bustle of servants and animals. But for the majority, you'd sleep in a single-room dwelling, where the fire smoldered in the center of the space, its smoke curling toward a hole in the roof. This meant you might wake to the acrid taste of smoke on your tongue, or the crack of a log shifting in the embers. Fire was both friend and foe. It kept you alive through bitter nights, but it could also take your home in a moment, if left unattended. And so one of the unspoken nighttime tasks was to bank the fire, piling ashes over the coals so they glowed safely until morning, ready to be coaxed back to life. If you think about it, these small, practical habits were stitched into the fabric of medieval life, learned from childhood. No one questioned them, and sleep itself was often tied to a rhythm of responsibility. If you were a farmer, you might use the break between first and second sleep to check on a lambing ewe, or to be sure the shutters were latched against a rising wind. But there were also more curious, even mysterious reasons to stir at night. In some villages, people believed that dreams were more potent between first and second sleep, and waking in this window might make your mind more open to visions, omens of the future, whispers from the saints, or warnings from beyond. A half-wakeful mind, they thought, could drift closer to the divine, or to the dangerous. This belief sometimes shaped bedtime prayers whispered, not only before you drifted off, but again during the night if you found yourself awake. And speaking of prayer, religious devotion was a common thread in the night's tapestry. Monastic communities structured their entire schedules around the divine office, 8 daily prayer times that punctuated their waking and sleeping hours. For monks, the middle of the night vigil was not an inconvenience, but a calling. They would rise in the pitch dark, shuffle into the chill of the chapel, and chant psalms in voices that echoed from stone walls into the heavens, or at least into the rafters where bats might be roosting. Imagine that your own interrupted sleep was nothing compared to the strict discipline of a life given over entirely to such patterns. For ordinary folk, these night hours could be more flexible. Some used the time for quiet conversations with loved ones. Others might have more physical ways of passing the time. In fact, medical advice from the era sometimes recommended intimacy during the middle of the night waking, claiming the body was rested warm and ready. It wasn't uncommon for children conceived in this quiet gap to later be jokingly called second sleep babies. But of course, not all wakefulness was welcome. In drafty, vermin-friendly houses, you might be pulled from slumber by the persistent itch of fleas. Bedding was a paradise for them, warm, dark, and undisturbed except when you shifted too much. And so scratching in the night was almost as normal as rolling over. Some people kept sprigs of herbs like lavender or rosemary tucked near their pillows in the hope of warding off insects. Whether it worked or not, at least it smelled a little sweeter than the straw mattress beneath you. In towns and cities, the night brought its own disturbances. Narrow streets funneled the clatter of late-moving travelers or the muffled calls of watchmen making their rounds. In London, for example, a curfew bell was rung to remind citizens to bank their fires and settle in for the night. But just because the streets were officially closed didn't mean all was quiet. There were always bakers working late to prepare bread for dawn markets, or taverns still spilling laughter and song through their open shutters. From your bed, you might catch the faint tang of yeast or the sharp bite of ale drifting in on a cold breeze. For the poor who sometimes slept in communal arrangements in stables or simple lodging houses, second sleep could be even more elusive. Coughing, snoring, shifting bodies, and the restless movements of animals all kept the air alive with noise. But the truth is, most people simply adapted. In a world without the hum of electric heaters or the glow of street lamps, night was already a patchwork of waking and sleeping moments. Your body knew how to rest in snatches, how to sink into sleep when it could, and how to rise without complaint when duty or discomfort called. And perhaps the most peculiar thing to modern ears is how normal all of this was. No one kept a sleep schedule in the sense we think of today. The hours of first sleep, waking, and second sleep were so ingrained that people didn't need to discuss them much, just as you don't need to tell someone you're going to brush your teeth before bed. The rhythms of night were simply part of living. So here you lie again in your straw-filled mattress, the embers faintly glowing on the hearth, the faint whisper of frost at the edges of the shutters. Your breathing slows. The conversation fades. The middle watch of the night is nearly over. Soon, the quiet will deepen into the soft darkness of second sleep, carrying you toward the pale gold edge of morning. But before that, the medieval night still has more to teach you. The air is colder now. The fire on the hearth has burned down to a fragile glow, and you can feel the bite of the night slipping in through every gap in the walls. The second sleep draws closer, but before you surrender to it, you can't help noticing the little habits and oddities people have for coaxing themselves back into dreams. In the medieval world, sleep wasn't something you merely fell into. It was tended like a garden with charms, rituals, and superstitions woven around it. If you were the cautious sort, you might keep a small talisman under your pillow, perhaps a carved piece of bone, a holy metal, or even a smooth stone said to keep nightmares away. Children were often given such tokens, sometimes stitched right into the seam of their sleeping clothes. The night was a place where unseen things might move, and no one wanted to risk drawing their attention. Some swore by sleeping with a sprig of St. John's wort, or placing a Bible under the bed. Others, particularly in rural areas, believed a small iron object by the bedside could repel mischievous spirits, iron being a metal thought, to ward off the unnatural. Dreams themselves were given great weight. A dream of running water might be read as a sign of change. A dream of losing teeth could foretell a death in the village. And so, lying there in the dim afterglow of the fire, you might whisper your dreams to your spouse upon waking. Partly for comfort, partly for the strange hope that speaking them aloud might shape their meaning. Dream interpretation manuals, when they could be found, circulated among the literate each page, offering mysterious, often contradictory explanations for the symbols that visited you in the night. But it wasn't all omens and wards. Sometimes falling back into second sleep meant simply making your body comfortable enough to ignore the cold. People learned tricks. You might wrap your feet in scraps of cloth, or nestle a warmed stone heated by the fire earlier in the evening into the bed to radiate heat beneath the covers. Wealthier households sometimes used brass or copper bed warmers, shallow pans with lids filled with glowing embers, and slid between the sheets before bedtime. Of course, this came with the risk of singeing your bedding, or worse, starting a fire. But when the frost could bite hard enough to numb fingers, people were willing to take calculated risks for warmth. In more cramped homes, sleep was also influenced by the daily smells and sounds of life. You might share your room not only with family, but with animals. Chickens in a corner coop, a goat tethered near the door, or a dog curled by the hearth. Their breath and body heat added to the warmth, but so did their occasional rustles, snuffles, and smells. A rooster could crow unexpectedly, stirred by a flicker of moonlight through a crack in the wall. A horse might stamp a hoof against the packed earth floor below. You became accustomed to this living lullaby, a mixture of human and animal rhythms that seemed to belong to the night itself. Not every medieval sleeper enjoyed a bed at all. Travelers might rest on straw pallets in roadside inns or on benches in a hall, where space was rented for the night. Some slept directly on the floor near the fire, wrapped in a cloak. In poorer homes, children might be laid to rest in makeshift cradles near the foot of their parents' bed, or simply in the same straw-filled nook. The idea of each person having a private, comfortable sleeping space was rare outside the wealthiest households. And then there was the simple fact that darkness itself felt different then. Today, most of us have never truly experienced complete night. Even in rural places, distant glows headlights or the gleam of the moon reflect off clouds. But in the medieval countryside on a moonless night, the dark was a living thing, dense, absolute, and full of quiet mystery. If you stepped outside between your first and second sleep, you might not see your own hand in front of your face unless the stars were bright. The only light came from your lantern, and even that seemed to struggle against the blackness. It was a world pared down to touch sound and smell. Inside this darkness could be softened with the faint golden shimmer of an oil lamp or candle. But candles were costly. Most peasants relied on the glow of the fire or a rushlight, essentially a reed stalk dipped in animal fat and left to burn slowly. Rushlights gave off a thin, uneven light and sputtered easily, but they were cheap and easy to make. Still, you didn't waste them without reason. Every flicker of light in the night was a small expense, a choice weighed against the long list of other needs. The idea of passing the night without complete safety was always in the background. In villages, the most you might fear was a thief slipping in through a poorly barred door, or a drunken neighbor mistaking your home for theirs. In more remote homesteads, You might worry about wild animals. Wolves, though rare in many places by the later Middle Ages, were still a part of the landscape in earlier centuries. Dogs served as both warmth givers and warning systems, barking at anything unusual. And then there were stories meant to keep children in bed, but which also gave adults a quiet shiver in the dark. Tales of wandering spirits of the nightmare that pressed on your chest and stole your breath while you slept, or of witches who crept in to steal a lock of hair for their spells. You didn't have to believe them completely to still feel uneasy if you woke to a strange creak in the rafters. Yet for all its uncertainties, the medieval night could also feel like a friend. There was a slow magic to it, a time when the village exhaled, when the air seemed to hold your thoughts gently and the world pressed pause. You could hear the rhythm of your own breathing. You could feel the soft weight of your blankets, the close warmth of others beside you. Second sleep waited patient and sure, like a tide ready to carry you into the next dream. And so you closed your eyes, letting the little rituals and comforts of the night ease you back into that quiet sea. Morning still feels impossibly far away. You can sense it buried somewhere beyond the heavy curtain of the night. But right now, the darkness holds sway. Your second sleep is beginning to cradle you, yet your mind drifts lazily through the other strange habits medieval folk had when it came to sleeping. You've already learned about the split night, the talismans, the warm stones in the bed. But there are even more peculiar customs, and they start with where people slept. For many, the answer was everywhere. While the main sleep happened in the bed, or at least in the bed equivalent of the household's short naps were scattered through the day like crumbs on a table. In farming communities, people often rose before dawn to begin chores, then caught small bursts of sleep after the midday meal, especially in high summer when the sun made hard work exhausting. These day sleeps weren't considered lazy. They were a practical way to survive the labor of the seasons. And they often happened right where you were on a bench, leaning against a wall, or stretched out on a cloak in the grass. In noble households, however, sleeping arrangements were a little more formal, though no less peculiar. The lord and lady might have a grand bed in a chamber apart hung with heavy curtains to keep out drafts. These bed curtains were not just for show, they were thick, often lined, and could make a world of difference when the winter wind slid down the chimney or seeped in under the door. The curtains kept in warmth, muffled sound, and created a small cocoon of privacy in a world where privacy was a rare luxury. Some people even hung such curtains around humbler beds, though made from simpler cloth, just to create that warm, enclosed feeling. In large manor houses, servants often slept in the same room as their masters on pallets rolled out at night. This made it easy to attend to needs during the night, tending the fire, fetching warm drinks, or even standing guard. The idea of separate bedrooms in the modern sense simply didn't exist for most. A room was a shared space layered with lives and duties. And if you were traveling, your sleep could be even stranger. Inns were often crowded with guests sharing rooms, and sometimes even beds with strangers. You'd arrive tired from the road, pay your fee, and be shown to whatever space was available. A four-poster with curtains if you were lucky. A straw pallet by the door if you weren't. Sharing a bed with someone you'd never met before was simply part of the travel experience, and etiquette demanded you make the best of it. People slept back to back or side by side without conversation, keeping their hands politely to themselves. Though, of course, not everyone followed that rule. One thing that might surprise you is how often people slept sitting up, especially for those with chronic illness. Sleeping propped on pillows or even on a bench was thought healthier than lying flat. Some believed it kept the humors of the body in better balance, preventing congestion of the chest or head. In fact, in certain noble chambers, you might find a sleeping chair designed just for this purpose, high-backed, padded, and angled for dozing. Sailors too often slept sitting or half-reclined in cramped quarters aboard ship, swaying gently with the movement of the vessel. And then there were the seasonal adjustments. In summer, when the days stretched long and the air grew warm, people often took their beds, or at least some bedding outdoors. Sleeping in the open air was refreshing, but it also kept you cooler than in the stuffy interior of a house. On fine nights, you might lie beneath the stars, listening to the whisper of grass in the breeze, the chirp of crickets, and the far-off hoot of an owl. In the morning, dew might dampen your blanket, but the cool freshness was worth it. Of course, you still kept your superstitions close, a sprig of protective herbs tucked near your head, or an iron blade laid beside you to keep away spirits. For city dwellers, rooftop sleeping was sometimes a necessity in crowded, airless rooms. Ladders and trap doors made it possible to carry bedding up to the roof, where you could stretch out under the night sky. But even there, the habits of medieval life followed. You'd keep a small lamp close, a jug of water at hand, and your ears tuned to the sounds of the street below. And speaking of sounds, the medieval night was never completely silent. You've already heard the subtle chorus of animals and the occasional human stirrings. But there were also planned interruptions. In some towns, the watchman made rounds and called out the hour, a practice meant to reassure honest citizens and warn any would-be thieves that the streets were guarded. Their voices might echo up through your shuttered window. 2 of the clock, and all's well. For some, this was a comfort. For others, it was just another thing to stir you from sleep. Even the act of waking up in the morning was different. Without alarm clocks, people rose with the sun or with the demands of their work. Roosters really did serve as a kind of living alarm in rural areas, though they were notoriously inconsistent. In towns, church bells often marked the first stirrings of the day, calling the faithful to morning prayers and tolling out the rhythm of civic life. In monasteries, the bells were a rigid command, breaking even the deepest second sleep and summoning monks to their morning devotions. The medieval world's sleeping habits weren't simply about rest. They were intertwined with work, faith, superstition, and survival. Where and how you slept said as much about your place in society as the clothes you wore or the food you ate. A laborer's straw-filled pallet, a noble's curtained feather bed, a sailor's rope-slung hammock. Each told its own quiet story. And now, as you lie here imagining yourself beneath those heavy bed curtains or out under the starlit summer sky, your own breathing slows again. The quiet is seeping back into the room, settling over the coals in the hearth, gathering in the corners like soft shadow. The second sleep is reaching for you, just as it reached for countless souls centuries ago, pulling them into the same dark tide that now waits for you. You feel the second sleep begin to settle more firmly now, a slow tide lapping at the edges of your mind. But the medieval night is far from finished with you. As you lie there in this imagined bed, you begin to notice how deeply sleep was tied to the seasons, the weather, and the unpredictable temperament of nature itself. The rhythm of rest was not just a human choice, it was dictated by the shifting world outside the door. In the short, dark days of winter, people often spent far more time in bed than they might in summer. The long nights demanded it. The cold encouraged it. But in bed didn't always mean asleep. Once the first sleep ended and you woke in the middle of the night, you might remain under the covers just to preserve body heat, chatting softly with whoever was beside you. You might tell stories, real or imagined, passing the time until your eyelids grew heavy again. Some families even used these hours for quiet teaching, a father murmuring lessons on planting seasons, a mother reciting prayers or bits of lore. The bed became a classroom, a confessional, a small hearth of human connection in the otherwise still dark. In summer, by contrast, the nights were shorter and warmer, and the boundary between waking and sleeping blurred. Farm laborers, exhausted by long days in the fields, might collapse into bed well after sunset and rise again before full dawn. The middle of the night waking still happened, but it was briefer, a smaller pause before the work of the day reclaimed them. And in the hot months, sleeping with the shutters open was tempting, though it risked letting in more than just cool air. Insects swarmed in summer darkness, and the itchy reminder of their presence could turn a restful night into a restless one. The weather also had its say. A violent storm could shake the shutters and rattle the roof beams, setting the whole household awake. In thatched cottages, heavy rains were especially worrying, as water might drip through the roof, landing with a slow, maddening rhythm into buckets set out to catch it. Wind, too, was an intruder, slipping through every gap and seam, making the bed curtains billow like sails. Some nights you might pull the blankets up to your nose just to escape the drafts curling across your face. And then there was illness, both the ordinary fevers and coughs of winter, and the more terrifying outbreaks that swept through villages without warning. Sickness altered the household's sleep in an instant. The healthy might take turns watching over the sick, rising in those middle hours to cool a fevered brow, fetch water, or keep a lamp burning through the night. Entire families might sleep in shifts during such times, the house never truly quiet, the line between night and day dissolving entirely. Children, too, were a shaping force in the rhythm of sleep. Infants needed feeding at all hours. Toddlers woke crying from night terrors or the unfamiliar noise of an owl outside. The family bed absorbed these interruptions as part of its living pattern. A mother might soothe a child with a lullaby, half sung, half whispered in the dark, the tune weaving itself into the fabric of the night until both slipped back into sleep. And as with everything in medieval life, superstition had its place. People believed certain nights were more dangerous for sleep than others, times when spirits were more active, or when the boundary between the living and the dead thinned. The night before the certain feast days or during the 12 days of Christmas was often said to be risky. On such nights, charms were refreshed, herbs renewed, and prayers doubled before bed. You didn't want to risk waking in the middle of the night to find something other than your spouse lying beside you. For travelers, the uncertainty was magnified. Sleeping in unfamiliar places meant trusting that the door was barred, that no ill-willed stranger would slip in while you slept, and that your belongings would still be there in the morning. Many travelers kept their valuables close, sometimes under the pillow, or in a pouch tied around the neck. And some slept lightly by choice, half listening for trouble, even as they drifted into dreams. But perhaps one of the most charming and quietly human aspects of medieval sleep was how much it depended on community. Neighbors might wake and call softly to one another across narrow lanes if something unusual was stirring outside. Families who lived close together might share early morning greetings before the sun was fully up. Sleep was a shared rhythm, a communal tide that ebbed and flowed through the night. In many ways, it was less private, less solitary, and more deeply woven into the life of the whole settlement. As the night deepens again in your imagined chamber, you can hear that tide returning. The rustle of someone settling back into the covers. The faint sigh of another breath falling into a slower, deeper rhythm. The house itself seems to breathe with you, the beams creaking softly, the coals whispering as they shift. Second sleep takes hold at last, wrapping you in the same blanket of dark that covered countless medieval sleepers before you. Somewhere beyond the shutters, the horizon is still a secret. Morning waits patient on the far side of the black. Second sleep has you now, but you're still faintly aware of the world around you, that half-floating state where thoughts drift and the room seems softer at the edges. In this space, it's easy to slip further into imagining the quiet peculiarities of how medieval people treated the very idea of a bed. For you, a bed might be the centerpiece of a room, a sturdy frame, a mattress, pillows, blankets. But for them, a bed was far more variable and far more telling about who you were. If you were a wealthy noble, your bed might be a marvel in itself, massive, carved from oak, its posts rising high enough to drape with heavy hangings embroidered in vivid colors. The mattress would be stuffed with goose down, soft and yielding, and the sheets of fine linen would carry the faint scent of lavender from the laundry. The hangings weren't just decorative. They kept out drafts and wandering eyes. In many cases, the bed was one of the most expensive items a family owned, passed down as an heirloom along with the linens. But most beds were humbler affairs. A simple wooden frame, a lattice of ropes stretched across it, a thick mattress stuffed with straw or wool. You'd have to tighten those ropes regularly, hence sleep tight, because a loose bed meant sagging in the middle and waking with a sore back. Straw mattresses were replaced periodically, but not too often. Replacing the straw was messy work, and old straw was often infested with insects. Still, it was better than the floor. In the poorest homes, the bed might be nothing more than a pile of straw on the ground, sometimes spread on a rough mat to keep it from scattering. The family might share a single sleeping space, everyone huddled together in the same nest for warmth. Even this was a kind of comfort. Body heat and closeness made the winter nights bearable. You didn't sleep alone unless you had no choice. Children often slept in trundle beds, low wooden frames on wheels that slid under the main bed during the day. At night, they were pulled out, fitted with a thin mattress, and shared among siblings. In cramped cottages, there was no real division between bedroom and living space. The same room held the cooking fire, the meal table, and the beds. Privacy was a luxury no one expected. For travelers or those without permanent shelter, sleeping was even more improvised. You might stretch out on a bench in a tavern, rent space on a floor in a crowded inn, or find a spot in a barn's loft among the hay. The idea of personal space was irrelevant. Sleep was wherever you could find it, with whomever you happened to share it. Then there was the pillow, or for many, the lack of one. Wealthier people enjoyed soft pillows filled with down or wool, often in linen covers. The poor might make do with a sack stuffed with rags or a folded cloak. Some even used a simple wooden headrest, much like those still found in parts of the world today, a practice meant to keep the head slightly elevated, though hardly comfortable by modern standards. Blankets, too, varied widely. Fine households had multiple layers, sheets, woolen blankets, and sometimes fur coverings for the coldest months. In humbler homes, you might have one heavy woolen cover for the whole bed, supplemented by cloaks or extra clothing. And in desperate winters, people sometimes slept wearing their outdoor garments, boots, and all to conserve warmth. If you were lucky enough to have bed curtains, you could close yourself off from some of the night's drafts. But those without made do with other tricks, sleeping close to the hearth, using windbreaks of cloth or reed mats, even piling straw around the bed as insulation. In the countryside, some households placed beds in alcoves built into the wall itself, like little sleeping closets, which kept heat close to the body and gave a surprising sense of safety. There were also differences in sleeping position. Many preferred to curl on their side for warmth knees, tucked close, sharing breath-outs with the person beside them. But some cultures within medieval Europe believed sleeping on your back invited bad dreams, or worse, the dreaded nightmare that pressed on your chest. Others warned against sleeping on your left side, claiming it could harm the heart or invite illness. Advice on sleeping posture varied from region to region, each wrapped in its own blend of observation and superstition. And even once you were settled, bed wasn't purely for sleeping. It was a place to recover from illness, to give birth, to nurse a baby, even to host visitors. In noble houses, receiving guests while still abed was a sign of status. Your chamber could become a sort of private salon, your curtained bed an intimate throne. For the rest of society, the bed was simply the warmest, most comfortable place to be, and much of life outside of work might happen there during long, cold months. You can picture it now, a small medieval room, the faint light of the hearth licking the walls, the bed, a humble wooden frame, or a grand curtained canopy depending on your station. You settle deeper under your covers, shifting to find the least lumpy part of your mattress. The night is quiet, but not still. The house creaks, the wind sighs against the shutters. A dog stirs downstairs. The second sleep is in full swing, your mind slipping further into its warm current. You are not alone in this pattern. Centuries of sleepers followed the same rhythm, under straw-filled ticks and feather-soft linens alike. The medieval bed was not just a piece of furniture. It was a world, a shelter, a stage for life's quiet hours. And as your breathing slows, you feel the weight of that long tradition pressing softly over you like an extra blanket, carrying you toward the still, distant morning. By now, you're so deeply in second sleep that it's almost strange to keep wandering through this imagined medieval night. But the picture is incomplete without peeking at how people prepared themselves for bed in the first place. The small evening rituals, the quiet habits, and the practical chores that set the stage for a night's rest. For most medieval folk, getting ready for bed wasn't an elaborate affair. There was no brushing your teeth with minty paste, no hot shower to rinse away the day. Instead, the winding down process was woven into the final hours of work. The fire would be stoked for the last time before banking dishes from the evening meal, scrubbed and cold water tools put away. Candles, if you had them, were snuffed to save their slow-burning wax, and rushlights were lit for the dim glow that would last until you slept. In rural homes, evening also meant tending to the animals one last time. Chickens were secured in their coop cows, and goats checked water, topped up in troughs. The low, warm smell of livestock mixed with the sharper scent of wood smoke from the hearth. It was the smell of safety of a household prepared to withstand the night. Then there were the washings, which were modest by modern standards. Most people didn't bathe daily, especially in colder months. A quick rinse of the hands and face in a wooden basin, perhaps a combing of the hair to remove tangles or lice, and you were as ready as you were going to be. Wealthier folk might have warmed water poured into a basin by a servant wiping themselves down with soft cloths. For others, the water was cold and bracing a final jolt before retreating under covers. Clothing for bed was simple. Many slept in their linen shifts, the undergarments they wore during the day, since these were comfortable, easy to launder, and served as a basic layer between the body and the bedding. In winter, an extra tunic might be added, or wool socks if they could be spared. Caps were common, too, soft linen or wool hoods to keep the head warm through the long night. For poorer people, these were essential. Heat lost through the head in a drafty home could make the difference between comfort and misery. Then came the prayers. In deeply religious households, these were not optional. A short blessing or recitation of the Lord's Prayer was common, but many also added charms or invocations for protection through the night. The darkness was not empty. It was a realm of unknown forces, of angels and demons of dreams that might be divine messages or dangerous temptations. Children were often taught to cross themselves before lying down, murmuring, "Now I lay me down to sleep," in whatever form their culture knew. And there were those little personal habits, things that don't make it into grand histories, but are stitched into everyday life. Some people arranged their bedding just so, shaking out the straw to make it fluffier, folding one blanket edge under to keep drafts out. Others tucked herbs into the bed, lavender to soothe rosemary, to ward off bad dreams, rue to repel insects. In winter, warming stones wrapped in cloth were slipped between sheets, just before bed, radiating a short-lived but welcome heat. In wealthier homes, servants might prepare the bed for their masters, turning down the covers, smoothing the sheets, making sure the bed curtains were drawn tightly. In humbler houses, this was done by whoever was last to bank the fire. It was one of those small acts that quietly determined how well you slept. A bed left unprepared could mean shivering through the night. Even the decision of where in the bed to sleep was sometimes deliberate. In a shared bed, the warmer, less drafty side might be claimed by the elder or more respected person. Children or younger siblings might take the outer edges where the cold crept in. Couples often slept facing away from one another to preserve warmth and reduce the exchange of breath, which in cramped winter spaces was considered unpleasant. Once everyone was in the household, would settle into a hushed rhythm. A last cough or murmur might drift through the dark, the clink of a latch as the door was secured, perhaps the faint squeak of bed ropes tightening as someone shifted. And then gradually, the only sound left would be the low sigh of the wind outside and the occasional soft crack from the hearth. For some, this was the most peaceful moment of the day, when the world outside the door faded away, when work paused, and when the closeness of family and the warmth of shared blankets wrapped you in a sense of safety. It was a pause in a life of constant labor, a reminder that night, for all its uncertainties, was also a gift. And now, in your own imagined medieval bed, you've completed the same ritual. The straw beneath you is uneven, but warm, the wool over you heavy, but comforting. The faint scent of herbs drifts from somewhere near your head. You've mumbled your protective words, pulled the blanket tight, and let the darkness draw close. Outside, the village sleeps in its patchwork of homes, each holding its own small pocket of warmth in the vast winter night. You breathe in, slow and steady. Somewhere deep inside, you've stepped into their rhythm now, the old cadence of sleep that carried centuries of souls toward morning. And as your mind drifts further into the cradle of second sleep, the medieval night folds over you as inevitable and as ancient as the turning of the stars. The dark has thickened into that peculiar middle-of-the-night stillness where even the wind seems to have gone to sleep. You're far down in second sleep now, yet still just aware enough to let your thoughts drift toward another part of the medieval night. The way people's dreams and what they believed about them shaped their understanding of rest itself. Dreams were not treated as random flickers of the mind. They were messages, sometimes divine, sometimes dangerous, sometimes simply puzzling. In monasteries, dreams might be recorded and examined for signs from God, warnings of sin or glimpses of the future. In villages, a dream could become a small event in itself, retold over breakfast to neighbors, who listened with the same seriousness they gave to weather reports. The meanings ascribed to dreams could be wildly detailed. A dream of a green field might mean good fortune, while a dream of tangled brambles might warn of trouble ahead. Dreaming of bread was said to promise prosperity, while dreaming of teeth falling out was often taken as a grim omen, perhaps of illness or death. And if you dreamt of traveling by water, that could signal a journey, literal or spiritual, soon to come. But it wasn't just the content it was when you dreamed that mattered. Those dreams that came in the pause between first and second sleep were often seen as more potent. The mind was thought to be especially open in this liminal space, neither fully in the world of the living, nor fully adrift in the realm of spirits. People sometimes even set out to catch certain dreams by going to bed with an intention in mind, whispering a question or problem into the darkness before closing their eyes. Of course, not all dreams were welcome. Nightmares were dreaded, and not just for the fright they caused. The nightmare was imagined as an actual presence, a malicious being that would press down on the sleeper's chest, stealing their breath and pinning them in place. We now recognize this sensation as sleep paralysis, but in the medieval mind, it was an attack, a visitation. The remedy was often to place protective charms by the bed, to sleep with a knife under the pillow, or to recite a certain prayer before sleep that would ward off evil. Other unwelcome visitors of the night were ghosts. If you dreamt of a dead relative speaking to you, it might be taken as a warning, or request perhaps they needed prayers, or perhaps they were foretelling something yet to come. Such dreams could prompt trips to the parish priest offerings at the altar, or even changes in daily plans. The boundary between dream and waking life was thin enough that what happened in one could shape the other. Some people believed that sleeping in certain positions made certain dreams more likely. Lying on your left side might invite visions of the past, while lying on your right could bring glimpses of the future. Sleeping flat on your back was risky thought to open the way for unwanted spirits to meddle in your dreams. It's easy to imagine a medieval sleeper shifting under their blankets, not just to get comfortable, but to guide their night's journey toward safe harbors. There were even practical uses for dream interpretation in daily life. Farmers might plant or delay planting based on a particularly vivid dream. Merchants might take or refuse a journey if their sleep had been troubled by ominous visions. Court intrigues could be fueled by rumors of who had dreamt what and what it might mean for alliances or rivalries. In some places, dream books circulated small manuscripts listing hundreds of possible dream images and their supposed meanings. These books were often borrowed, copied, or adapted for local use, blending folk beliefs with biblical references and a dash of astrology. A single dream could be read a dozen ways depending on the interpreter's skill mood or personal bias. But just as often, dreams were shared informally, a kind of nighttime gossip. In the morning around the fire, someone might say, "I dreamt last night the thatch on my roof was aflame." The others would murmur, exchange glances, perhaps tell similar stories from the past, and weigh whether it was an omen or just the mind's wandering. Dreams stitched themselves into the fabric of conversation, becoming part of the quiet news of the day. For all the weight given to them, dreams were also a form of companionship in the long, cold nights. They gave people something to talk about, to wonder over together, and in some small way, they made the darkness feel less empty. Whether seen as divine, dangerous, or just curious dreams, were a nightly reminder that sleep was not a blank space, it was a journey one every medieval sleeper took, wrapped in their own patchwork of superstition, hope, and fear. And so you too drift deeper into your own imagined second sleep, where the room is warm, the darkness thick and close, and the world outside has faded to nothing but the slow, steady drum of your own heart. Whatever dream finds you now, you are part of a lineage stretching back through centuries, a long, unbroken chain of sleepers carried through the night, by visions only they could see. The dreams are deep now, but the medieval night still has more to reveal. Somewhere between the world of visions and the waking cold, you begin to think about how profoundly sleep was tied to the cycles of labor and rest in this age. In the Middle Ages, you didn't sleep simply because you were tired. You slept in step with the demands of your work, your household, and the turning of the year. In a farming village, the shape of your sleep might change with every season. In spring, when the days were lengthening and planting called for long hours, outdoors, nights were shorter. You might rise before the first light to begin in the fields, then catch a stolen nap after the midday meal. In harvest season, the work was even more intense, up before sunrise, laboring until the stars reappeared. The middle of the night waking might still happen, but it was briefer, more of a bleary-eyed rollover than a conscious interlude. Winter, though, was another matter. When snow and frost locked the land in stillness, the nights were long and deep. People could afford to linger in bed to talk quietly through the first waking, to take their time settling into second sleep. Tasks like mending clothes, carving wooden tools, or repairing harnesses could be done in those hours between sleeps when the mind was alert, but the body still reluctant to leave the warmth of blankets. For artisans and tradespeople in towns, the rhythm was different. A baker might deliberately wake in the dark middle hours to tend the bread ovens, ensuring fresh loaves for the dawn market. A blacksmith might start earlier in summer to make the most of the cool hours before the forge's heat became stifling. Merchants might rise early to catch travelers setting out at first light, their goods packed and ready before most of the town had stirred. In monasteries, the night was carved into an even stricter discipline. Monks followed the canonical hours, waking for matins in the deep dark, sometimes returning to bed afterward, sometimes staying awake until lauds greeted the sunrise. These religious punctuations to the night meant that sleep was more like a series of short journeys than one continuous voyage. It was a discipline, an offering of time and awareness in service to God. Even among ordinary folk, the church bells shaped the boundaries of rest. The sound of a bell in the distance might tell you it was time to rise for work, or that the night was still yours for a while longer. In some places, the curfew bell at evening signaled the official close of the working day and the beginning of the night's rest, a reminder to bank fires, lock doors, and let the world grow quiet. There was also a kind of social awareness about when you were asleep and when you were not. In small communities, people noticed who rose early, who was slow to start the day, who was seen moving about during the middle hours of the night. A neighbor spotted at a strange hour might become the subject of whispered questions. Were they tending a sick child, meeting someone in secret, restless because of a guilty conscience? Nighttime movements could take on meanings beyond the practical, feeding the slow-moving gossip of village life. And there were practical dangers to consider too. Traveling at night was risky, even within familiar territory. Paths were uneven, lantern light dim, and the possibility of footpads, robbers who lurked on lonely roads was never far from mind. So most stayed within their homes from sundown to sunrise unless necessity demanded otherwise. When someone did venture out, they usually went in pairs or groups carrying staves or tools that could double as weapons. Inside the home, the dangers were quieter, but still present. A sudden draft could make the fire sputter, threatening to leave the household cold until morning. Illness could worsen overnight, and in a world without quick remedies, the night's long hours might mean waiting helplessly until dawn. This was one reason why prayers before bed were so important. They were not just a pious habit, but a plea for safe passage through the night's uncertainties. Work and rest in the medieval world were not separate spheres. Sleep was not a neat box on the daily schedule. It was a fluid part of the whole rhythm of living. The hours you rested the way you rested, and the interruptions you accepted, were all dictated by the realities of survival. And yet, despite the demands of the day and the unpredictability of the night, people managed to find a kind of comfort in the familiar patterns. You can feel that same comfort now, in your own imagined place in this centuries-old rhythm. You have worked your day, you have tended your fire, you have shared words in the dark with those close to you. The middle waking has passed. Second sleep is deepening. Outside, the frost has grown heavier, silvering the thatch and the hedges. The night holds you as it held countless sleepers before, until morning's first gray light begins to creep across the land. Second sleep wraps around you now like a familiar cloak, but the medieval night still has its quieter details, those small, almost invisible customs that shaped the way people thought about sleeping and waking. You've heard about beds and bedding dreams and dangers, but just as important were the rituals of waking itself. Morning in the Middle Ages didn't usually arrive with a sharp jolt. There was no shrill alarm clock, no bright burst of electric light. It came slowly, creeping into the senses in layers. First, perhaps you noticed the change in the air, the faintest lifting of the darkness, a loosening of the night's grip. Then the subtle shift in sound, the first low coo of a pigeon in the rafters, the creak of the house as its timbers warmed with the coming day, the muffled stirrings of animals in the yard. If you lived in the countryside, the rooster might call before the sun even showed itself. In towns, the bells of the parish church often marked the early hour, their bronze voices carrying through narrow lanes. For some, these bells were the signal to rise at once. For others, they were just part of the morning's gentle coaxing, something to be heard, but not yet obeyed. Waking wasn't always a solitary act. In a shared bed, one person's movement was enough to nudge the others toward wakefulness. A parent might murmur to a child, a spouse might whisper a reminder about the day's work. The room would fill gradually with the sounds of small preparations, clothes rustling, feet finding the floor, the scrape of a chair being pulled closer to the fire. In wealthier homes, a servant might come in to stir the fire back to life before their masters rose, letting the warmth chase away the chill of the bedchamber. They might bring in a basin of water for washing along with a towel, so the day could begin with a brief ritual of cleanliness. In more modest homes, each person saw to their own morning washing, sometimes with nothing more than a splash of cold water from a bucket kept near the door. Before anything else, the hearth had to be woken. In most houses, the fire never truly went out. It was banked at night, so that the embers still glowed faintly come morning. These embers were coaxed back into flame with kindling and a few well-chosen breaths. The smell of wood smoke thickened in the air, mixing with the damp scent of the sleeping room and the faint tang of wool blankets. Only once the fire was burning steadily could the morning truly begin. Food came next, or more often the preparation for food. Bread baked the day before might be set near the fire to soften, perhaps spread with butter, or dipped in ale for a quick meal. In rural homes, someone might go out to milk the cows or goats while another fetched water from the well. This work was often done before the sun was fully up, the cold biting at fingers and noses as the day took shape. For those bound by religious life, the morning began with prayer, as surely as it ended with it at night. Monks and nuns attended lauds, the early service of praise, before any other duty. Lay people might say a brief prayer on waking, thanking God for safe passage through the night and asking for strength in the day ahead. In some homes, these prayers were said together. In others, quietly, each to themselves. The transition from night to day was rarely hurried. Even in busy towns, there was a certain softness to those first moments. The streets still hushed, the light still pale, the world not yet fully awake. It was a liminal time as delicate as the one between first and second sleep, and it carried its own sense of possibility. But not every day began peacefully. Storms could batter the shutters, flooding the morning, with noise before you even opened your eyes. A sick child's cry might pull you from sleep long before dawn. A knock at the door in the early hours could bring news welcome, or not, that would shape the rest of the day. Life had a way of spilling into the quiet, and the medieval world was never short on unexpected interruptions. Still, for most, waking followed a familiar rhythm, slow return of sound and light, the steady warming of the hearth, the gathering of household members into the day's first tasks. The bed was left behind not as an abandoned comfort, but as a duty completed, its warmth still lingering on the skin. You can imagine it now, sliding from your own imagined medieval bed feet, meeting the cool floor, fingers brushing aside the bed curtains. The air smells faintly of smoke and wool, the light just beginning to find its way through the shutters. You've survived another night in this ancient rhythm, and as the day stretches out before you, you carry the soft weight of its rest in your bones. By now, the second sleep has ended in your imagined medieval morning. But as you step into that day, it's impossible not to notice how the night still lingers in people's habits and thoughts. In this world, sleep and waking are not separate islands. They are a chain, each link shaped by what came before. And the stories of the night often traveled into the daylight, carried like embers from a banked fire. In the morning, people might exchange accounts of their dreams as naturally as they spoke about the weather. A neighbor at the well might tell you she dreamt of a river flooding and wonder aloud if it meant heavy rains were coming. A farmer sharpening his tools might mention he dreamt of wolves near the sheepfold and consider it a warning to keep watch that week. These weren't idle tales. They were part of a shared mental map of the world, a way of interpreting the threads of fate. Sometimes the night brought more than just dreams. In towns and villages alike, the hours after first light were when news spread of anything unusual that had happened after sundown. A chimney fire in a nearby street. A midwife called to attend a difficult birth. A traveler arriving late from the next market town. These became the first whispers of the day. People were quick to notice movement at strange hours. The medieval night was a time when the world narrowed to home and hearth, so any disturbance stood out. For those who worked in shifts that spanned the night, bakers, watchmen, guards, the change from dark to light was as much a relief as it was a beginning. The baker's work was nearly done as the first market customers began to arrive. The night watch passed their duty to the day watch, exchanging quick words about anything seen or heard in the hours before. In monasteries, the brothers who had chanted matins in the dark now moved quietly into the rhythm of daily prayers and worked their voices softened by the long hours behind them. Households often took advantage of the early morning to complete tasks best done in cooler air. Laundry, for instance, was started before the sun climbed high. Water was fetched from wells or streams while the light was still gentle. In rural areas, herds were driven out to pasture as soon as the frost began to lift the sound of their bells and lowing carrying across the waking fields. These chores were not just practical, they were also a sign that the night's stillness was officially over and the day was in motion. But the night's influence lingered in subtler ways. In the cold months, people often carried some of the bed's warmth with them by wearing layers of clothing right from waking, keeping that cocoon intact. In summer, they might rise slowly, savoring the coolness of dawn before the day's heat claimed it. And in all seasons, the memory of the night's quiet could make the morning feel softer, a little slower, as if the whole village was shaking off a dream together. It's worth remembering, too, that medieval timekeeping was less exact than ours. Without the precision of clocks in every home morning was a flexible notion. It might mean the moment the first streak of light appeared, or it might mean after the church bell for prime had rung. In some places, work began as soon as one could see well enough to do it. In others, people lingered indoors until the sun was fully above the horizon. And of course, not everyone greeted the morning willingly. Just as now, some people were slow to rise, their bodies reluctant to leave the warmth of blankets. In larger households, this could spark playful teasing or stern reminders from those already at work. Servants who overslept risked the displeasure of their masters. Children might be roused with a splash of cold water if gentle calls failed. The morning also brought with it the chance to reset from whatever the night had carried. If bad dreams had troubled you, daylight offered a kind of absolution. If illness had worsened, you could now send for help. If worry had kept you from sleeping, you could put your hands to work and push the thoughts aside. The return of light was a reminder that even the longest night ended eventually giving way to action and choice. And so as you imagine yourself in this medieval morning, you can still feel the presence of the night in your bones, a faint echo of its slow rhythm, its deep quiet, its peculiar habits. You've walked with them through both sleeps, heard their prayers and superstitions, shared their crowded beds, and whispered stories. You've stood with them at the threshold, between darkness and day, carrying forward the simple truth that sleep was never just an absence of waking, it was a world in itself. The day has begun, but the night is still near. And before we leave it behind entirely, there are more strange and tender details about medieval sleep to explore, each one a thread in the long tapestry of the dark. Even with the day's work now stirring around you, your thoughts drift back toward the quiet rituals and strange beliefs that gave medieval sleep its shape. It's one thing to understand the rhythms of first and second sleep, or the practicalities of bedding and warmth. But there's another layer, how people thought the soul itself moved in the night. In many parts of medieval Europe, sleep was imagined as a kind of small death. Not in a morbid way, but in the sense that your body and spirit parted company for a while. Some believed the soul wandered freely while you dreamed, traveling over landscapes, meeting spirits, even glimpsing the divine. This wandering could be harmless, or it could be dangerous. A sudden waking, they thought, might startle the soul and make it slow to return, leaving you dazed or not quite yourself for hours afterward. That's one reason why gentle waking was valued. Parents might softly call a child's name or touch their shoulder instead of shaking them. In some places, people avoided waking someone suddenly, at all preferring to let them stir on their own, unless urgency demanded otherwise. The idea was to allow the soul to re-enter the body smoothly, without fright or confusion. But the night wasn't simply about the soul's wanderings. It was also about the thin line between worlds. Some held that the dead could visit in dreams, bringing messages, warnings, or requests for prayers. The living might also cross into dangerous territory, tales told of witches and night travelers whose spirits left their bodies to roam while others slept. People protected themselves from such threats by placing protective charms near the bed or marking the doorway with a cross before nightfall. Even the position of your bed could matter. In certain regions, it was considered unlucky to sleep with your head pointing north, said to draw illness or invite restless spirits. Others insisted the bed should be placed so that the sleeper faced east, the direction of the rising sun symbol of resurrection and hope. A poorly positioned bed might be rearranged as soon as someone fell sick, just in case unseen forces were at work. For the devout, the bed was also a place of spiritual discipline. Nighttime prayers were not just for protection, they were a reminder of humility, of the closeness between the sleeper and the Creator in those quiet hours. Some people even kept a small crucifix or icon on the wall near their bed, so the last thing they saw before closing their eyes was a sacred image. The presence of such symbols was thought to shield the sleeper's mind from temptation and keep harmful visions at bay. And yet, alongside these pious habits, there were deeply earthy ones. Farmers might keep tools by their bedside in case of sudden need: an axe, a sickle, a stout staff. Travelers might keep their boots within easy reach, so they could be on the road quickly if trouble came. In rougher areas, weapons were as much a part of sleeping arrangements as blankets. A dagger under the pillow wasn't always a superstition, it could be a necessary precaution. The shared bed itself played a role in protection. A family huddled together for warmth was also a family less vulnerable to intruders or wild animals. In inns or lodgings where strangers slept side by side, people might keep small possessions under their heads or in pouches worn even while sleeping. To sleep in the medieval world was to surrender to vulnerability, so every habit and arrangement was a small act of making that surrender safer. Even animals figured into these protective customs. A dog sleeping near the bed was more than just warmth. It was an early warning system. A rooster might roost high in the rafters indoors during winter, its sudden alarm enough to wake the household if someone approached. Cats too had their place, though. Their presence was more about comfort than guard duty. Their steady breathing and warmth, a quiet reassurance through the long night. And when illness came, the entire household's sleep could change shape. A sickbed might be moved closer to the fire, or the patient might be surrounded with herbs believed to purify the air. Healthy family members might take turns watching through the night, dozing in chairs or on the floor. The sick person's bed became a little world unto itself, a guarded space where waking and sleeping life and death seemed to hover close together. All of these customs, superstitious, practical, or somewhere in between, were a way of making peace with the night. The darkness held risks you couldn't see, so you faced it with charms and prayers, with the closeness of others, with a careful awareness of how the body lay and how the soul might travel. It was a night both feared and cherished, its dangers softened by ritual, its beauty deepened by the knowledge that it always gave way to morning. Now, in your imagined medieval room, you can almost feel the weight of these centuries-old habits pressing into the air around you. The bed is not just a place to rest, it's a shelter for the body, a safe harbor for the soul, and a quiet stage where the unseen currents of the world pass close enough to touch. The night holds you still, and you like them trust in its long, slow embrace until the first pale light finds its way in. Even now, as you linger in this imagined medieval world, it's clear that sleep was never just an act of closing your eyes. It was woven into the social fabric, as much a part of community life as work worship or feasting. The way people slept said as much about their relationships as it did about their comfort. Think of the shared bed again. It wasn't only for family members. Guests, traveling companions, and even business partners might share sleeping space. To modern ears, this might sound awkward, but to them, it was normal, practical even. The warmth of another body on a cold night could be the difference between restful sleep and waking stiff and chilled. There was etiquette to it, of course. Sleep back to back if you didn't know each other well. Avoid hogging the covers. Keep your boots off the bed. Breaking those unspoken rules could earn you a quiet grumble in the morning, or in the worst case, a cold shoulder from someone whose goodwill you needed. In inns, this communal sleeping was unavoidable. A bed might hold 2, 3, even 4 travelers, depending on its size and the demands of the night. In some cases, people didn't even have their own spot, but rotated. One slept while another kept watch or worked. Then they swapped. Inns were crowded, noisy places. Even in the deep of night, you might hear a low murmur of conversation, the creak of floorboards, the snore of someone in the next bed. Sleep, there was not a private retreat, but a shared state, everyone drifting and waking in overlapping rhythms. Within a household, who you shared a bed with could signal trust, closeness, or necessity. Children often slept with their parents until they were old enough to join siblings or sleep in a loft space. Servants might sleep near their employers either for convenience or protection. An honored guest might be offered a bed in the main chamber as a sign of hospitality. And in times of sickness, a healthy sleeper might trade places with someone closer to the fire, taking the colder spot themselves. Bed sharing was a negotiation of warmth, safety, and relationships. Even sleeping arrangements could reveal social rank. In wealthier households, the master and mistress had a bed raised on a dais, curtained and richly appointed, while servants and apprentices slept on pallets on the floor. In rural cottages, the difference was less dramatic. Parents had the main bed, older children, perhaps a bench bed, the youngest, wherever there was space. The hierarchy of waking life was mirrored quietly in the way people settled for the night. Festive times could turn these arrangements upside down. During big celebrations, weddings, feast days, harvest festivals, guests might sleep wherever they could fit on benches by the hearth, in makeshift beds of straw. The lines between host and guest blurred. The whole house became a sleeping hall. In those moments, sleep felt communal, almost like a continuation of the day's merriment. The snores and sighs part of the lingering celebration. In towns and cities, night often brought neighbors together in subtle ways. In closely packed streets, sounds carried easily: the shutting of shutters, the muffled laughter from a nearby room, the call of a watchman passing on his round. Sometimes, if a household woke in the night, perhaps to tend a fire or quiet a crying child, they might see light through a neighbor's shutters and call softly across the lane. Such exchanges were brief but intimate, a reminder that even in the dark, you weren't entirely alone. There were also community roles tied directly to the night's rest. The watchman patrolled to keep the streets safe, calling out the hours. In rural areas, someone might be responsible for checking on livestock during the night, their movements a reassuring sign to others nearby. In monasteries, the ringing of bells in the small hours reminded everyone awake or asleep that they were part of a larger rhythm, a shared spiritual duty that threaded through the darkness. And of course, there was gossip, always gossip. Who was seen walking at an odd hour? Whose shutters stayed open late into the night? Who was slow to rise when the morning bells rang? In a world without bright lights or nightlife as we know it, nighttime activity was noticed, remembered, and often discussed. The night could be a quiet space, but it was also a stage on which the smallest deviations stood out. Through all of this, sleep bound people together. It wasn't just about closing your eyes. It was about sharing the vulnerability of the night, trusting that those around you would keep watch in their own way, whether through a literal patrol or simply the shared warmth of a bed. And you imagining yourself in that long-ago world can feel that trust settling over you now, the same trust that let countless medieval sleepers give themselves over to rest. The room is warm from shared bodies, the blankets heavy, the faint hum of breathing filling the dark. You're not sleeping alone. You're part of a living web, a quiet fellowship that carries you through the long hours until dawn. In this way, medieval sleep was not just a private need. It was a communal act woven deep into the life of the whole village, town, or household. Even as you sink deeper into the quiet of this imagined medieval night, you can see that sleep was shaped not only by habit and community, but by the great sweep of the calendar. The seasons, the harvest cycles, the feasts and fasts of the church, all of them left their mark on how, when, and even why people slept. In the cold grip of winter nights were long and heavy. People often went to bed earlier than in any other season, not because they were especially tired, but because daylight was scarce and work slowed. First and second sleep stretched further apart, and the waking in between could last longer, sometimes an hour or more, before the second sleep reclaimed you. Families used this middle time for small, quiet work, mending torn clothes, sharpening tools, shelling nuts, or telling stories in the flicker of the hearth. With the bitter cold, pressing in beds became cocoons, and every warm body was precious. Spring was different. As the days lengthened and the earth softened, life quickened. Lambing season brought nighttime interruptions, farmers rising in the dark to check the barns, carrying lanterns against the damp chill. Seeds were sown early, often in the cool hours before sunrise, which meant waking before the roosters. Sleep was shorter, more scattered, but carried the promise of renewal. Summer, with its long days and heavy labor, had its own sleep pattern. Work in the fields often stretched into late evening, and the heat indoors could make sleep difficult. People might rest outdoors under the open sky or on rooftops where a breeze could be felt. The middle waking might be shorter sometimes, just a drowsy adjustment of blankets before falling back. For those in towns, warm summer nights brought the occasional distant sound of music or merriment from a tavern still awake past sundown. Autumn was a season of exhaustion and satisfaction. Harvest demanded early starts and long hours, but it also brought feasts and gatherings. The days were cooler, now the nights crisp, and the bed once again became a welcome refuge. People slept deeply, often falling into bed still aching from the day's work, the first sleep thick with fatigue. The middle waking might be barely noticed, just a blurred moment before the second stretch carried you into morning. The liturgical calendar also shaped the nights. On the eve of great feast days, households might stay awake longer for prayer storytelling or quiet preparation. The 12 days of Christmas, Easter week, and Midsummer's Eve all had their own rhythms. Some of these nights were thought to be liminal times when the boundary between the earthly and the spiritual thinned. People guarded their dreams on such nights, believing they could carry blessings or dangers into the waking world. Fasting seasons like Lent also affected sleep. Going to bed with a lighter meal or on an empty stomach could make sleep harder to find, or dreams stranger and more vivid. Some took these dreams as signs of spiritual progress, others as warnings to take greater care. Monastic life in particular saw fasting as both a discipline and a test, and nights during such times could be long and wakeful. Even the agricultural fairs and markets had their effect. On the night before a market day, towns were alive later than usual, with merchants preparing goods, loading carts, and sharing late-night ale before the early departure. Travelers setting out before dawn might rouse neighbors as they passed their cartwheels rattling on the cobblestones. Sleep on such nights was lighter, interrupted by the stirrings of a world on the move. In this way, medieval sleep was never static. It bent and shifted with the turning of the year, with the pull of work and worship, with the feast and famine of the land. There was no fixed formula, only the deep, slow rhythm of human life meeting the cycles of nature and faith. And as you lie here now in your imagined bed, you can feel that rhythm breathing around you. The air carries the scent of the season, whether the sharp cold of winter smoke, the damp sweetness of spring earth, the hay-laden warmth of summer, or the crisp bite of autumn frost. You're part of a pattern older than in a clock, older than in a one village or household. You close your eyes and listen to it, the steady beat of centuries of sleepers rising and falling with the wheel of the year. In that rhythm, the night holds you steady, carrying you forward to the dawn. Now, in the deepest quiet before dawn, you begin to sense that the medieval night is drawing to a close. But before we leave it entirely, there are still a few of its stranger and more unexpected sleeping habits to visit, oddities that reveal just how differently people once thought about the dark hours. One such habit was the watchbed. In some households, especially those in towns or on the edges of unsettled countryside, someone might be assigned to stay awake through part of the night. This watch could be a servant, a family member, or even a hired guard, and their job was to tend the fire, keep an ear out for trouble, and ensure the household slept safely. Sometimes this duty rotated. Other times, it fell to the same person, night after night. In certain noble houses, the watchbed might be placed near the main entrance, so the sleeper could rouse quickly if a knock came or a gate creaked open. There were also beds built into the wall box beds or cupboard beds found in some regions of Northern Europe. These were small enclosed sleeping spaces with sliding doors or heavy curtains, almost like sleeping inside a wooden chest. They kept in warmth but also privacy, and sometimes they were shared by more than one person. In cold winters, the air inside such a bed would be noticeably warmer than the rest of the room, the body heat trapped in its little wooden cave. Another quirk was the traveling bedroll. Merchants, pilgrims, and messengers often carried their own bedding rolled up during the day and spread out wherever they found a place to rest. Bedding was valuable, and using your own not only guaranteed a bit more comfort, but also reduced the risk of bringing home the fleas and lice of an unfamiliar bed. In some places, superstition played directly into where you laid your head. If a person fell ill, it might be considered dangerous for them to continue sleeping in the same bed or even the same spot in the room. They might be moved to confuse the illness or to prevent the spirit of sickness from finding them again. Similarly, new mothers were sometimes encouraged to sleep in a different bed for a time, for both symbolic and practical reasons, part protection, part allowing the main bed to be used by others in the busy household. There were also sleeping arrangements tied to work. Millers sometimes slept right in the mill, lulled, or perhaps kept half awake by the low grinding of the stones. Shepherds might doze in small huts out in the fields, one ear tuned to the sheep, even in sleep. Fishermen often rested in short bursts, their nights governed by tides rather than clocks. For them, sleep was less a long, deep retreat, and more a series of small harbors in the current of the day. And in every walk of life there were the unplanned sleeps, the nap by the fire that lasted until morning, the doze in a chair after supper, the collapse into straw after an exhausting day's work. These moments were as much a part of medieval rest as the formal nights in bed. Sleep was flexible. It came where and when the body demanded it, not always where convention suggested it should. When you add all these customs together, medieval sleep becomes a tapestry, threads of practicality, threads of superstition, threads of simple human need. It's easy to see why the modern 8-hour block feels so different. It's the product of electric light, industrial work schedules, and a culture that imagines sleep as a single, sealed-off event. In the medieval mind, sleep was porous. It spilled into the day, it welcomed interruptions, it adjusted itself to seasons' work and faith. And as you lie here in your imagined bed for the last time tonight, you can feel the quiet wisdom in that looseness. You've walked with them through the long watches, shared their warmth, listened to their midnight murmurs, and learned their strange ways. Outside, the black of the sky is beginning to pale at the edges. A single bird calls, testing the air. Somewhere a shutter is eased open to the first whisper of dawn. It's time to let the night go. The night has loosened its hold. The long medieval hours you've wandered through have quieted into memory, woven now into your own slowing breath. You've walked the narrow lanes under a cold moon, shared a bed with strangers and kin alike, listened to the murmured prayers, the creak of beams, the soft clink of a banked fire. You've drifted through first sleep and second sleep, through dreams thick with meaning, through the hush of watchmen's calls and the distant bark of dogs. It's easy to see now how deeply the night once belonged to everyone. It was not a sealed-off private hour, but a shared living thing stretching across the village, the town, the cloister, the lonely farmstead. It was carried in the rhythm of the seasons, in the habits of work and worship, in the way people curled together for warmth or sat awake to guard the rest of others. It was a time stitched with superstition and practicality, with small comforts and quiet vigilance. Now you've stepped back from that world, yet a part of it lingers. You can almost feel the weight of the wool blankets, hear the faint rush of the wind against the shutters, smell the mingling of smoke and straw. It is slower here, softer here, more forgiving than the hours you know. Let the pace of that older night carry you now. You have nothing left to keep watch over, no tools to sharpen, no shutters to bar. Let the worries that clung to you loosen, like the snow melt dripping from a thatched eave. There is only the slow rhythm of your breath, the gentle drift toward warmth, the quiet folding in of the world. The night is safe, sleep is waiting, and morning will come when it's ready.